Tonight on Newsnight Scotland, if you go down to the woods today, you probably won't be in for a big surprise. But who knows, maybe at some point in the future you might run into one of these. Or even this chap. They're native to this country, so should we try to bring them back? And time hasn't softened this big beast. Tam Dalyell, arch opponent of devolution, tells us how he would resolve the independence debate once and for all. Good evening. A scheme to reintroduce the white-tailed eagle to the east of Scotland has suffered a setback after the tree in which the area's only breeding pair was nesting was destroyed. The white-tailed eagle disappeared from that part of the country 150 years ago. It joined the elk, lynx, wolf and brown bear in vanishing from our natural environment. But calls to rewild Scotland by reintroducing some of these creatures, as well as long-gone native plants, have been getting louder in recent years. Laura Maxwell has been examining the arguments for and against.
Glorious wilderness or desolate domestication of the landscape. Although Scotland remains the least populated place in Britain, just 1% of what was once the Great Caledonian Forest remains. Now efforts are underway to turn this into this. It's known as rewilding, and the issue is the same all over the UK. It leaves this Welsh hill looking like many a Scottish moor.
The trees were repeatedly cut and burnt and cleared, and you end up with this. It's really a barren landscape. And what you've got here, heather and rough grassland, is typical of the sort of vegetation which you get all over the world where you've had repeated deforestation. You get low, scrubby vegetation like this. And yet in Britain, we fetishise it. We think this is what we want to preserve.
Rewilding's not just about trees. Under EU law, member states are obliged to consider the reintroduction of indigenous species. In some cases, the process is already underway. After 400 years, the beaver is back in the wilds of the West Coast. Released into the Knapdale Forest in Argyll just over 4 years ago, the families seem to have settled in well, busy doing what they do best, building. The beavers aren't the only species making themselves at home. The reintroduction of the white-tailed sea eagle, Europe's biggest bird of prey, appears to have been successful. But police are tonight investigating claims that the first nest to be built by a pair in the northeast of the country has been destroyed. But if there's resistance to the reintroduction of big birds, what sort of reaction would there be to, for example, the brown bear? Supporters of rewilding say we need to balance our ecosystems, and that includes bringing back wild boar, elk, and even these.
Our ecosystems are very bottom heavy. They're missing most of the top links in the great web of life. We're only beginning to discover how important certain species are as ecosystem engineers, as changing the world around them.
Wild wolves aren't on the cards just yet, but the Eurasian lynx is a more likely possibility. An application has recently been made to Scottish Natural Heritage to bring 2 pairs to a West Coast forest. George MacDonald has been a deerstalker and gamekeeper for almost 40 years. He's open to the reintroduction of species, but says it all rests on the way these animals are managed.
Scotland has expanded in human population, so therefore, you know, you can't suddenly put in a major predator in amongst the human population, because there will be ongoing problems, and they'd have to be really sure that they'd have an understanding of what they would do, where they would operate, and also to find out how they would take action to catch or to remove them again if they became a serious problem.
Even in an urban rural place like this, one small change can have a very big impact on both the ecology and the economy. Everyone who lives and works in the countryside wants it to be healthy and vibrant. So should all this nature be nurtured, or should we allow it to go wild?
Well, I'm joined now from Inverness by Alan Watson-Featherstone. He's the Executive Director of Trees for Life, which supports many rewilding initiatives. And with me in Glasgow is David McCracken, who is an upland ecologist with Scotland's Rural College. Alan Featherstone, look, let's not get into the details of this particular case about sea eagles, because apart from anything else, the police have got their tweeds on and are currently investigating. But is it your impression there is a general hostility amongst landowners to the reintroduction of these raptors?
I think there's a varied response from people. I know people who are quite keen and enthusiastic, and there's others who have their doubts and concerns. But I think over the populace as a whole, there's been a movement in a very positive direction, not just for things like the sea eagle, but also for the red kite and the osprey, you know, which are two others that have made successful comebacks in recent years.
Now, when you have ambitions to reintroduce animals like elks and wolves and even bears, I just wonder, what's the point of all this?
Well, we advocate the return of all the missing species from our landscape because they all have a crucial role to play. But it's not something we as an organisation could do ourselves. It would have to be a decision made at a national level.
But why should we want to do this?
Well, I think the main reason is recognising that they have a crucial role to play, as your clip indicated earlier.
But they don't have a crucial role. I mean, for example,
we've had substantial parts of our ecosystem removed. Most of the forest cover is gone, the predators are gone, and the ecosystem is not able to recover at the moment. Large areas, particularly the Northwest Highlands, are in a state of heavy suppression, and not just forests, but other ecosystem types like mires and bogs are not in a state of health.
Okay.
And if you imagine what would happen in East Africa, for example, if you took away the lions and the cheetahs and the leopards, things would go into decline. That's what we've already experienced.
Okay, all right.
It's a case of shifting baselines. You know, we've grown up with that, and we don't know what we're missing.
Okay, David McCracken, do you buy that?
Yes, I mean, as you heard in the piece, and as Alan has said there, there's two rationales behind why we should consider reintroducing some of our lost native species. One is the moral imperative. You know, they all died out because of human persecution in the recent past or in the distant past. But also, as Alan was saying, they are a part of the sort of the normal ecosystem functioning. And so something like a predator like lynx or wolf or brown bear could help increase what's called the resilience of the habitats, the ecosystems that are actually there, help them be more adaptable to any sort of change.
But you can understand why the people who own the big estates in the Highlands would say, well, look, hang on a minute, you want bears and wolves because supposedly there are no natural predators, you know, of, for example, deer. Yeah. We've made a multi-million-pound industry out of replacing that.
Yes, you know, and I can certainly understand that, and I can understand concerns from the farming community. You heard there from the sort of the Gamekeepers Association, crofters, etc., who have got livestock out there, and who would be concerned about how what the impact would be on their wildlife and their sort of livelihoods, which is why, before we have any reintroduction, we need to consider carefully not just what the impacts would be on land use, but what the impacts would be on our existing habitats and our existing species, many of which are still of high nature conservation value.
Right, but I mean, essentially this is a choice. I mean, all this talk about going back to nature, I mean, there's no such thing really as nature in the countryside in Scotland or anywhere else. It's about choices made by humans, about how we fancy our landscape looking, isn't it?
Yes, to a large extent. I mean, this is the year of natural Scotland, but in reality, Scotland, as well as large parts of Europe, haven't really been natural in the wilderness sense of a sort of North American wilderness sense. We have managed or utilised our natural landscapes in some way since humans came back in after the Ice Age. Right,
but in that case, Alan Featherstone, I was reading one of your papers about the area at Glenafric. I mean, I think you in that paper say, well, look, you can't go back to what the forest used to be like, partly because we don't know what the forest used to be like, and partly because it's in a completely different context when we reintroduce even plants into forests. So it is about human choices, isn't it? I mean, all this talk about going back to nature or preserving nature is largely mystical, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't think that's the case at all. But you're right, it is about choice. And, you know, as humans, we have dictated the state of most of the planet today. And the choice that faces us is, do we want to continue to do that in a way that exerts human values and human domination over all of the world, every last square inch of it? Or are we willing to step back from some places where we could let the rest of nature continue its path
But
free
we wouldn't
of
be doing that
total
because even
direction
if
by
we
humans.
reintroduced up to bears into Scotland, it would be so heavily, you know, fenced round or restricted that it would only be in some fantasy sense a state of nature. It's been nothing like that at all.
Well, I don't think it has to be that way. The bear is probably the most problematic of the large mammals, you know, that are missing at the moment. But people elsewhere in Europe happily coexist with things like the lynx, and there's no reason why we couldn't do that in Scotland as well.
Okay,
We've got plenty of space.
Now, obviously,
And studies have shown we could support, with our existing habitat, we could have up to 600 lynx in Scotland without any more forest cover or any changes to the landscape at the moment.
all right, now, if it is about human choices, you can understand if people say, I've got a lovely new flower I want to reintroduce into Glen Affric Forest. People are absolutely fantastic. Perhaps even a few elk. We're going to stick wolves just up the road for you. No, thank you very much, we're not having that.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly legitimate response, isn't it?
Yes, yes, I think with the reintroduction of any species, but particularly some of these large mammals, predators, it has to be done in consultation with sort of the local communities and to help them understand what the implications would be for them.
But
and
I
also
suppose
what
the
the
other
potential
side of
benefits
this
could be.
is that, and it's a point some of the people on Alan Featherstone's side of the argument make, is that particularly the kind of farming you have in the areas affected by this is not really economically viable. It's entirely subsidised, and it's really a social choice that we as citizens make, that we like the countryside looking farmed like that.
Yes, well, I think that's, you know, that's a good point to come in on. A large part of the debate about rewilding has been driven by the fact that our lowland landscapes are very biodiversity poor now, very intensively managed. But we have to recognise that a large part of the existing farming systems in our hills, and our uplands and our islands do support a wide range of habitats and species currently existing that are considered to be of high nature conservation value across Europe. And we need to be sure that the impact of any reintroduction of those is not going to affect that unique resource. We have 40% what's called high nature value farming systems.
Very briefly, Alan Featherstone, can you believe that in your lifetime we'll have bears in Scotland?
As I said earlier, I think bears are the most problematic. I would like to see certainly lynx come back, and I think that's entirely feasible and realistic. Things like the wolf, I'm not sure about. I think there needs to be a sea change in public opinion about that, because we're still all brought up with children's fairy tales of Little Red Riding Hood and Hollywood werewolf movies, which paint the wolf in a totally false picture as this evil, malicious creature, which it's not at all.
Wolves are cuddly. We'll leave it with that thought. Thank you both very much indeed.